esa idea de una vida convencional, de trabajo y de familia. Quedó atrás la manera de ver todo, apática, sin buscar forma ni modo. Quedó atrás, quedó atrás.
What do we want? When do we want it? Hi, and welcome back to Animal Liberation TV. So, this is part 2 in my series Spotlight on Vivisection. And I'm keeping the focus on Huntingdon Life Sciences. Now, they call themselves Covance. In this one, I've got a little film I made that I put together that I got from I cut up from mostly from a film called Maximum Tolerated Dose, which seems to be an anti-vivisection film that not many people talk about, but it is actually a really good film. So I highly recommend that. So I've nicked the Sarah Kite part out of that film. So definitely worth a watch. It's on YouTube, Maximum Tolerated Dose. Anyway, so this episode is basically about Sarah Kite's expose of HLS in 1989. So a lot of people who are into animal rights and might know about the Shat campaign, which was started in 1999, might be aware that there was a Channel 4 expose, which I've sort of used clips from, the people punching the beagles and stuff from HLS in a number of my videos, but especially I think from Dusk Till Dawn 1, I think. So a lot of people know about that Channel 4 exposure of Huntingdon, Covance, but in fact there probably wouldn't really have been, I mean, half the things that went on in the 90s relating to Huntingdon and Interfauna, their beagle suppliers and rabbit suppliers. A lot of that stuff wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Sarah Kite's undercover work in 1989. And there were a whole number of things that inspired. So she worked there for a few months and she wrote a book about it, and it got some national press. And out of that, kind of, it inspired the grassroots movement. Everyone knew the name Sarah Kite and about the Huntingdon exposure in the grassroots movement as I got involved in 89, 90, more involved in animal rights stuff. Her name was common everywhere. Everyone would talk about Sarah Kite's exposure of HLS. So she did an incredible job of bringing attention to them, and you know, it obviously moved her a lot and upset her a lot having to do that. She's obviously a good person and was deeply upset by what she had to witness and kind of half take part in. So total massive respect to Sarah Kite for this, and that's something we need more of, is undercover exposures from inside labs. And the only thing I would say, I mean, I'm not inciting that, but as a movement, philosophically speaking, it would be good to have that information out there, let's put it that way. But you'd have to treat it like direct action probably, because you could get in a lot of trouble these days with all these injunctions and stuff. So you'd have to be prepared for the storm that could follow. But for people who haven't got convictions, you know, shut down your social media accounts and apply for a lab job. Not that I'm encouraging to do that. So, yeah, you know, the good thing about people who do the undercover work is they expose the truth of what goes on. the reality of it. So by showing this film, you don't necessarily have to listen to anything I say about HLS Covance, because you hear it firsthand from someone that worked there, Sarah. So it's vindication of everything I'm saying about how horrible this place is. So yeah, she really kind of helped shape the grassroots animal liberation movement in the 90s. She brought a focus onto HLS. She brought a focus back onto vivisection because of that, because of the information and stuff that she gathered and gave out. That gave us knowledge about what they were doing inside there. So yeah, I mean, I've no doubt that it was part of the Sarah Kite thing that helped inspire the Interfauna raid. Interfauna have changed their name now, but they supply the beagles and the rabbits to Huntingdon, a lot of them, and other big companies. But anyway, Interfauna was raided on St Patrick's Night in 1990, and in fact a couple of people went to prison for that. One of those was John Curtin, and after Barry died, everyone started saying what they knew Barry had done, exposing it. And from Barry's obituary, I read something out from John Curtin, who spent, I think, 9 months in jail for this Interfauna raid. And there's footage of that in this video that I'm going to show. Let's have a look. So John Curtin, who went to prison for the Interfauna raid, writing about Barry Horn's involvement. I'll never forget his input into a raid we did together at Interfauna on St Patrick's Night 1990, in which 82 beagles and 26 rabbits were liberated. Typical Barry, he listened to the plan, added a few practical points with a minimum of words, and then got on with it, quiet, determined, and utterly committed. A pure source of inspiration on the night for those who found themselves flagging and getting tired after constantly ferrying the animals across muddy fields. All those years as a dustman carrying bin bags came in well handy, solid to the core. Okay, in fact I'm going to give you a closer look at the Interfauna poster I've got on the wall. Okay. There we go. So all those animals were liberated. Amazing. And you'll see the fate that they'd have suffered. And you'll hear a description from Sarah in this little film about what beagles there go through. I'll leave the facts of what she says to the film so that you get it fresh from her mouth rather than mine. But that Interfauna raid was no doubt inspired by her undercover work. Also in 1990, Barry Horn and 2 others were arrested with explosives in the boot of their car, which we can now say were destined for the coaches for the hunting and life sciences workers. They had coaches bringing people in from the local towns and stuff, and they were going to burn the coaches out at night when no one would have got hurt. It's not with all the workers in it, people aren't that mental. So yeah, that was the plan. So that obviously was connected and inspired by the information about what takes place in HLS from this account. What else? Oh yeah, also in 1990, in the summer, there was a big demo outside HLS, and in fact I went on that. I was 19 at the time, so I was I'd done a season sabbing. I was starting to do more and more animal rights stuff, and this was kind of the biggest grassroots event I'd been to at that point. So I was just like, wow, in awe of it. And in fact, that's where I saw a coach load of people coming from Manchester, and I thought, oh yeah, I think I might want to go where that is. That's obviously a bit of a hotbed if there's a whole coach of them coming down to this lab. Anyway, I remember it being a very hot day. It was a few hundred people, but it wasn't massive. I'd been on massive World Day marches in London organised by NAVS, the National Anti-Vivisection Society. In the late 80s, every April, like the third weekend in April sort of thing, there'd be World Day for lab animals. And this was a huge event for the animal rights movement. It would be like 25,000 people or something marching against vivisection. We never got any news coverage at all, never. But 25,000 people. What do we want? Animal liberation. Where do we want it now? It's just a shame that a lot of those people didn't do much more than shout for it. But that's what movements are like. So, so this was, I was used to those tens of thousands for the World Day in London. This one at Huntingdon was like a few hundred people, but it was the grassroots, and there was just a kind of different energy actually to it, I thought. As a 19-year-old boy, like, oh. And then at the end there were some talks given by people, and most of them were sort of standard stuff. And then John Curtin came up, who I mentioned before, and he gave a speech about it, Huntingdon, and it was a bit rabble rousing, and it was just really straight talking. And it was all about animal liberation. It was from an animal liberationist perspective. And so I was like, as a young man, it was like, wow, yeah, I was soaking it up, yeah. So I got very excited that day, and then there was a couple of dozen people pushing at the gate, shaking the gates of the lab, and I was like, wow, Jesus, this is exactly what I fancy being into. And it kind of set a course for me. I kind of moved to Manchester because I saw that from that day that there was a big coach. So for me personally, Huntingdon's got a big sort of part of my initiation into the movement, or the sort of beginnings of the movement. But the funny thing is loads of us that really got quite heavily into the ALF stuff over that next year, 91, and were all subsequently nicked and imprisoned for it. That's why I can talk about it. What we did was, as we became friends and got to know each other, there was always this one common link that we noticed, and that was that we'd all pretty much been there on that summer demo, that hot day in 1990 outside HLS. And there was something about that captured the imagination of loads of us in the grassroots, and kind of that happened to all become kind of ALF activists. So there's actually a real central part that demo, for example, played. The Interfauna poster. I mean, everyone's house that I used to go around to in 1991 had one of these on their wall. Everyone had one of those. They were everywhere. So all of that stuff really was inspired by Sarah Kite's undercover investigation. And don't forget, a lot of us carried on through the rest of the 90s and helped form the Huntingdon Death Sciences campaign, and went on to sort of help with the Shack stuff. I kind of was doing other stuff in my life at that point when kind of Shack took over. But so it was kind of a running theme through all of us. HLS was always in the background, even if it wasn't the current big campaign we were working on. For years, it would be in our hearts and souls of all the grassroots people. And I know for a fact that HLS is under the skin of still hundreds and hundreds of, maybe thousands of people around the country. I know for a fact that's true, because they do get under your skin when you hear what they do, when you see what they do. Anyway, so the point I'm saying here is that this story here, in terms of vivisection in the UK, and even potentially worldwide, because of the Shack campaign that came out of the hunting and stuff a decade later, became the biggest animal rights campaign ever. So, and Sarah's undercover investigation was what started all this, really, in my mind, and it's central to the anti-vivisection struggle in the UK. So it's another key moment I'm giving you in the history of the animal liberation movement. So hope you feel like you're learning something again. I hope that it gives you food for thought, as always. And this is a very, very moving account. If you're not shedding a tear by the end of it, well, there's something probably wrong with you. Seek help. Right. So I've got a quote from Barry that I want to read before I show this little film that I put together. And I want you to try and sort of bear in mind his words as you're watching this film. We fight a war with no past precedent against an enemy with no understanding of who we are or why we cannot be driven back or discouraged. For herein lies our greatest strength. We have no understanding of their words such as compromise, the rule of law, surrender, or defeat. Instead, we know only such words as love, compassion, freedom, liberation, and victory. So I hope you get something from this short little film that I pieced together. It is a moving portrayal from the insightful accounts of Sarah Kite from this undercover work she did. It's very moving. So I hope you get something from it, and take care.
In the heart of Cambridgeshire, surrounded by miles of beautiful, low-lying countryside, lies a small village called Woolley. Driving from Woolley towards the A1, one cannot fail to notice what appears to be a large industrial complex snugly situated in a valley. At a distance, it resembles a large factory with its chimneys and assortment of buildings. A fairly innocuous-looking place, set back off the A1, surrounded by open fields. On approaching the site, you can see that it is totally surrounded by high wire fencing. There are also video cameras set back within the grounds. Those buildings that do have windows are often blanked out completely. As you drive nearer to the main gates of the site, you can see security guards. If you slow down in your car, do not be surprised when they step out of their office to watch you. You may even see them writing something down and talking into hand radios. Surely they are not taking down your car number. Again, you wonder what sort of establishment this could possibly be. Could it be something to do with the armed forces? There is nothing to suggest what might be taking place here behind all this security. The centre is well known in the area. Indeed, many locals have worked there or have family or friends employed at the complex. Those that haven't are well informed nevertheless. The centre's work has been the subject of heated local debate for years. Behind those brick walls and blanked out windows are thousands upon thousands of animals being forced to take part in toxicological research, something you could not possibly have known from simply driving past. But then you weren't supposed to.
So to anybody who's watching this video and sees those puppies, sees those innocent creatures and knows the pain and suffering that goes on in that vile, horrible place, for God's sake, get up, go out, fight, stop it. We've got to stop it.
I found that some of the animal technicians were asking me to become a bit more involved in some of the work, for example, like picking up the dogs and taking them from the pens to the technicians who would then be force feeding these animals with capsules which they would force down their throats. So it got too difficult for me, and I decided to leave, and it was very difficult to leave. I mean, in one sense, there was a great relief that I no longer had to go back to that place, but at the same time, I felt guilty about leaving those animals behind. But I left, determined that I would actually make sure that I did reveal what was going on to them. I remained in rodent toxicology until July. At my request, I had asked for a transfer to the dog toxicology unit to embark on the next stage in the investigation. Despite being pleased that I had been granted the transfer, I knew that after having already spent 5 months at HLC, I now had to find new reserves of emotional and physical energy to get me through the next few months. Once again, I found myself peering into rooms full of beagles. The last time I had done so was during my interview in January. Now, almost 6 months later, I was ready to record and photograph day-to-day life within the dog toxicology unit. There were 3 dog units altogether with the capacity to house up to 1,500 beagles at any one time. HLC proudly claimed that this is the largest dog laboratory facility in Europe. Units J06 and D12 were the 2 experimental buildings containing 20 and 10 rooms respectively. I was told by another member of staff that the beagles were bred locally in Huntingdon at an establishment called Interfauna. Interfauna was founded by 2 ex-HLC employees and breeds a variety of animal species for research.
Interfauna breed animals for vivisection. Their clientele consists of evil animal abuse establishments such as Huntingdon Research Centre, Unilever, Boots and Glaxo. As well as the UK, they supply to Europe and as far afield as the USA and Japan. In this raid, a total of 82 beagle pups and 36 New Zealand white rabbits were rescued. All had been brutally tattooed. They are now all enjoying a life of love and freedom. 2 brave people were jailed for this action, and 9 months respectively. Both have now been released.
The life of a beagle at HLC comprised being shut in a barren, unfriendly cell with no bedding or play objects. They were allowed just half a spadeful of sawdust to aid the cleaning out process and a food and water bowl. It was a terrible way for a highly sociable pack animal to have to spend his or her life. On top of these conditions, the beagles then had to endure the pain and suffering associated with the daily toxicity tests. I watched as these tiny bundles of pent-up energy threw themselves around their small, bare cells, bored and frustrated. On opening the cage door, they would tumble out and hurl themselves up and down the room. As one beagle was released, others would catch sight of him or her darting around and start barking excitedly, waiting for their turn. After just a couple of minutes of frantic activity, they would struggle in my arms as I picked them up to return them to their cages. Once back in, they would throw themselves at the cage door as I closed it behind them. After having worked in the unit for just a short while, I soon discovered that this excitable behaviour shown by the puppies, the darting around and refusing to return to their cages, does not last long in most of the dogs. In just a few weeks, those who still ventured out of their cages, and many would not, would meekly return, offering no resistance, their spirit broken. I was deeply saddened to see that cages that had previously contained beagles were now empty. All that remained to show that the beagles had been there were food bowls and their experimental cards left hanging on the cage doors. The 30 days of life that this group of beagles had been allowed by HRC had now run out. Although the forlorn little beagle with a dejected look, who had affected me so, was still in her cage, I knew that she too would soon be dead. In just a short while the room would be completely empty. The brief lives of these gentle animals would have come to an end. As I walked out of the room, I was overcome with sadness and a terrible sense of loss at the death of these beagles. The whole day had become a nightmare, and I decided then and there I could take no more. I therefore walked through the gates of HRC for the final time on that Saturday the 16th of September 1989, overwhelmed by the grief and anger that had built up inside me for the past 8 months. But with a solemn promise to the animals... But with a solemn promise to the animals I walked away from, that their suffering would remain a secret no longer.